The day humans finally stepped into the Galactic Council's chambers was unlike any other in the history of Earth. The world had been watching for months, waiting to see what their representatives would do. The news channels were filled with live reports. Experts debated on the potential outcomes, and ordinary people couldn't stop imagining what alien life might look like. For the humans who actually made the journey, the experience was both thrilling and terrifying. Every step they took in the gleaming corridors of the Council's headquarters felt like walking on the edge of history. The Council's building itself was unlike anything found on Earth. Towering walls shimmered with colors that shifted with every glance, and the air seemed to hum with energy. Humans had never seen technology like this: machines that moved without wheels, lights that floated in midair, and symbols that seemed to communicate without sound. For a moment, the visitors from Earth felt small and out of place, as if they had walked into a dream made real. Yet beneath their awe, there was a sense of purpose. They were here not as tourists, but as ambassadors of a planet that had long struggled to prove its worth in a galaxy full of civilizations older and more powerful than humanity. From the very beginning, it was clear that the Council members were confident in their own authority. They had been negotiating interstellar matters for centuries, dealing with species that humans had only read about in science fiction. They believed they understood the rules of diplomacy better than any newcomers could. The Council's representatives were tall, many-limbed, or shimmering in forms that defied human anatomy, but all shared one trait: a quiet air of superiority. They had never met humans before, and they assumed that a species so young in galactic terms would be flexible, perhaps even easily persuaded. The humans, however, carried a quiet determination that surprised many observers. From the first greeting, they spoke with respect, but also with clarity. They emphasized that Earth wanted peace and cooperation, but not at the cost of its independence. Every word they said carried weight. They did not demand, but they also did not bend. This calm firmness created a subtle tension in the room. Council members exchanged glances, trying to gauge how serious these humans truly were. For humans, the stakes could not have been higher. They were representing the lives of billions, the hopes of generations, and the future of a planet still learning how to navigate a universe far bigger than itself. The first meetings were formal, almost ceremonial. Humans were seated at the central table, surrounded by beings whose mere presence seemed to radiate authority. The Council opened the discussion with typical protocol, introducing each member and summarizing the agenda: trade agreements, interstellar treaties, and mutual defense arrangements. It was a lot for humans to absorb, but they listened carefully, taking notes and asking questions when necessary. They spoke not with arrogance, but with a quiet confidence born from years of struggling together as a species. It quickly became clear, though, that the Council had underestimated humans in one important way. They assumed humans would prioritize immediate gain over principles. Many species in the galaxy were willing to compromise everything for technology, resources, or influence. Humans, however, had a different approach. They cared about fairness, about ethics, and about mutual respect. They did not want to sign agreements that would give them advantages at the expense of others, but neither would they agree to any terms that would limit Earth's freedom or expose it to hidden dangers. To the Council, this stubbornness was unusual, even inconvenient. The humans' behavior created subtle ripples of tension. During one discussion about trade, the Council suggested a plan that would give Earth access to advanced energy technology, but only if humans agreed to allow monitoring of their planet's development. The humans listened politely, but declined. They explained that Earth's growth had to remain under Earth's control, and any external interference would be unacceptable. Council members frowned, whispering among themselves. One representative leaned back, clearly surprised that the humans were not more eager to accept what seemed like a generous offer. It was the first sign that the council might be in for a long and unexpected challenge. Even outside the formal meetings, humans were carefully observing the council and its representatives. They noticed the subtle ways the aliens communicated gestures, lights or vibrations that carried meaning beyond words. Humans had never encountered anything like it, and it required intense focus to understand. Yet, even in these moments of adjustment, they maintained their composure. There was no fear, only alertness, curiosity, and respect. Other species in the chamber began to take notice. Whispers circulated about how resilient and perceptive these newcomers were. Some were impressed, others skeptical, but none ignored them. As the first day progressed, the humans found moments of quiet reflection in the council's vast corridors. They passed massive halls where murals depicted interstellar history, with scenes of alliances, battles, and discoveries spanning hundreds of worlds. It was awe-inspiring, and yet it reminded them of the fragility of peace. The council had been powerful for centuries, but its authority was not absolute. Humans could see that. They could also see that if they acted wisely, they might influence the galaxy not through force, but through integrity and careful diplomacy. By evening, the human delegation gathered in their quarters to discuss the day. They spoke openly about their observations, the subtle dynamics at the council, and what they believed would be the next challenges. There was no panic, no false bravado, only thoughtful conversation and planning. Every member understood that this mission was about more than negotiating deals. It was about showing the galaxy that humanity deserved respect, that Earth would not be pushed around, and that humans could hold their ground without resorting to aggression. Despite the overwhelming scale of the Council's environment and the intimidating presence of its members, humans felt a growing sense of confidence. They realized that their unique qualities, curiosity, determination, empathy, and courage, were exactly what allowed them to navigate such alien circumstances. They were not the oldest or the most technologically advanced species, but they were capable of reason, cooperation, and vision. The Council may have underestimated them at first, but humans were learning quickly, and they were ready to stand their ground. By the end of Part 1, the stage was set. Humans had arrived, observed, and begun to assert themselves quietly but firmly. The Council, still confident in its authority, had yet to realize that the visitors from Earth were not easily swayed or intimidated. Every small interaction, every conversation, and every gesture carried meaning. The human delegation had made their first impression, one that would resonate far beyond the chambers of the Council. And while the day ended with no dramatic confrontation, the seeds of tension and mutual respect had been sown. Humans had stepped onto the galactic stage, fully aware of the risks, fully aware of the stakes, and fully aware that this was only the beginning of a journey that would challenge not only their intelligence and courage, but also the very way the galaxy viewed Earth. The next day began with a sense of anticipation and tension. Humans knew that entering the council chambers was one thing, but negotiating their position within it was something far more delicate. Every movement, every word, even the tone of their voices mattered. Unlike anything on Earth, the Council's discussions were conducted not only through spoken language, but through subtle vibrations, lights, and gestures. Humans had spent hours learning to read these signals, and now they were about to put their understanding to the test out as the session began. The Council introduced a series of proposals that seemed reasonable on the surface. Trade agreements, resource-sharing deals, and cooperative exploration programs were all outlined in precise detail. The humans listened carefully, taking notes, asking questions, and responding in ways that were polite but firm. They acknowledged the benefits of collaboration, but they also made it clear that any agreement must respect Earth's independence. Every member of the delegation understood that compromise was necessary, but surrendering control was not an option. At first, the Council seemed patient. They explained their plans in elaborate terms, using holographic displays and advanced visual aids to illustrate the potential benefits of cooperation. The humans paid close attention, analyzing each suggestion and considering the long-term consequences for their planet. Yet, as the discussions continued, subtle differences in priorities began to surface. The Council wanted compliance. They wanted humans to accept terms without question. Humans, on the other hand, wanted fairness, transparency, and respect. It was a clash of values more than a clash of words. Tensions began to rise when the Council suggested a proposal. That would require humans to share detailed information about Earth's defense capabilities and technological developments. The representatives framed it as a gesture of trust, but humans saw it as a dangerous overreach. They politely declined, explaining that sharing such sensitive information would compromise the safety of millions of lives. Some Council members frowned, clearly frustrated that their carefully designed offer had been rejected. The humans, however, remained calm. They knew that firmness, combined with respect, was more persuasive than fear or aggression. Outside the formal discussions, humans observed the behavior of the other species present. Some were curious and friendly, while others were cold and judgmental. The humans noticed that the Council's confidence was sometimes fragile. Beneath their calm, composed appearances, there was unease. Whispers circulated among the alien delegates, questioning whether humanity could truly be trusted, whether their insistence on fairness was naive, or whether it was a sign of strength. Humans could sense the subtle shifts in the atmosphere, and they adjusted their strategy accordingly, remaining diplomatic but unwavering. During a particularly tense session, one Council representative attempted to pressure the humans into agreeing to a clause that would give the Council oversight of Earth's natural resources. The humans immediately recognized the danger. This was not just a negotiation. It was an attempt to control their planet. With calm voices, they refused and explained the importance of autonomy. They emphasized that trust and respect could not exist where coercion was involved. The Council was taken aback. They had expected humans to yield under pressure, but instead, the humans' response was firm and principled. A hush fell over the chamber as other members of the Council exchanged uneasy glances. The humans' refusal sparked a series of private meetings among the Council members. They debated how to handle a species that would not bend to their authority. Some argued for patience, others for stronger measures, but all were forced to acknowledge that humans were unlike any species they had dealt with before. Humans were not aggressive, yet they were not submissive. They were curious, yet they were cautious. They were cooperative, yet they were independent. This combination made them unpredictable, and unpredictability is always uncomfortable in a place governed by rigid rules and expectations. Humans continued to navigate the negotiations with care. They listened more than they spoke, asked questions to clarify intent, and remained polite even when tensions rose. Yet, they also made clear where their boundaries lay. Every suggestion that threatened Earth's autonomy was met with a calm but firm response. Every offer that seemed unfair or unbalanced was scrutinized and debated. The Council, which was used to species that either complied or resisted openly, found itself facing a form of resistance that was neither confrontational nor submissive. It was something they had never encountered before: steady, intelligent, principled negotiation. Even as the formal sessions progressed, humans took time to observe the Council's culture. They noticed patterns in behavior, subtle alliances among members, and the ways decisions were influenced by pride and tradition. These observations were invaluable. Humans realized that understanding the Council's psychology was just as important as understanding their proposals. They began to anticipate reactions, to read hidden meanings, and to prepare responses that were measured yet firm. It was not just diplomacy. It was strategic thinking, and humans excelled at it. The day also brought moments of quiet reflection. Humans wandered through the vast halls, studied murals depicting historic events, and marveled at the technology that surrounded them. The grandeur of the council's chambers was overwhelming, but it also reinforced their purpose. They were not here to be dazzled or intimidated. They were here to represent Earth, to safeguard its interests, and to ensure that their planet's voice was heard. This sense of responsibility grounded them, reminding them that every gesture and every word mattered. Despite the challenges, there were small victories. The council began to recognize that humans could not be easily manipulated. Subtle nods of respect appeared in some members' expressions. Quiet acknowledgement of human intelligence and integrity emerged in private discussions. It was not complete trust, but it was a beginning. Humans understood that change would not happen overnight, and that patience, clarity, and persistence were their most powerful tools. By the end of the second day, humans had established a reputation. They were respected, even if reluctantly, for their principled stance and their calm composure. The council was beginning to realize that they were dealing with a species that could not be ignored or taken lightly. Humans had made it clear that they valued cooperation, but not at the cost of autonomy. They had shown that diplomacy could be firm without being aggressive, that intelligence could coexist with integrity, and that patience and persistence could challenge even centuries-old authority. Humans left the chambers that evening with a sense of cautious optimism. They knew that the real test was only beginning, but they also understood that they had set the tone for every interaction to come. The council had underestimated them at first, but humans had quietly proven that they were a force guided by principles, capable of holding their ground without hostility, and ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. This day was not about victory or defeat. It was about establishing presence, demonstrating values, and showing that humanity would not be pushed aside or underestimated. The humans' calm, unwavering approach had already created ripples across the council, and the other species in the room were starting to take notice. Some were impressed, some were skeptical, but none could ignore the fact that Earth had arrived on the galactic stage, not as a weak newcomer, but as a thoughtful, intelligent, and principled player. As humans prepared to rest, they reflected on the lessons of the day. They had seen both the strengths and weaknesses of the council. They had observed how power could be both commanding and fragile. They had confirmed that diplomacy was not just about words, but about understanding, patience, and strategy. Most importantly, they had recognized the importance of unity. Each member of the delegation relied on the others for insight, support, and perspective. Alone, they would have been vulnerable. Together, they were resilient. The events of the day had planted seeds for the days to come. Humans understood that this was a negotiation unlike any other. It was not simply about resources or technology. It was about respect, trust, and the recognition of Earth's sovereignty. The council had begun to notice that humans were not ordinary. They were capable of reasoning and standing firm without arrogance or aggression. This was a revelation, one that would shape every future interaction and define the relationship between Earth and the wider galaxy. By the end of Part 2, humans had achieved something crucial. They had established boundaries, gained a subtle respect, and positioned themselves as equals in a room full of centuries-old power. The council was beginning to realize that underestimating humans was a mistake. And while the path ahead was uncertain and filled with challenges, humans had demonstrated that their combination of patience, intelligence, and principle would guide them through even the most complex and delicate negotiations. The following day started with a sense of urgency. Humans had entered the council chambers with determination, fully aware that their patience and careful strategy were about to be tested. The previous day had set the stage. Humans had shown they could hold their ground without aggression, but today, events would escalate, and the true nature of the council's intentions would begin to show. From the very first moment, it became clear that the council had something different planned. The session opened with the usual formalities, but there was an undercurrent of tension in the air. The humans noticed subtle changes in the expressions and gestures of the council members. Lights flickered faintly in patterns that suggested agitation and soft vibrations. A silent language of warning and urgency moved through the room. Humans, trained to observe and interpret these subtle signals, understood that today's discussions would be critical. The council began by revisiting the agreements proposed the day before, but the tone had shifted. There was less patience, less willingness to explore options, and more insistence that humans accept certain conditions immediately. The representatives spoke of efficiency, unity, and stability, presenting their demands as necessary for the greater good of interstellar harmony. Humans listened carefully, asking clarifying questions and responding with thoughtful explanations. They emphasized that Earth wanted peace and cooperation, but not at the cost of its freedom or security. It was during this session that a critical incident occurred, one that would leave a lasting mark on human-council relations. A representative of the council, a tall being with shimmering, translucent skin and multiple eyes, introduced a clause that humans immediately recognized as dangerous. The clause required Earth to allow the council oversight over key resources and technologies, effectively giving them indirect control over the planet. On paper, it was presented as a cooperative measure, but humans understood its implications. It was more than a suggestion. It was an attempt to manipulate and dominate. Humans exchanged quick, silent glances. They understood the risk and the significance of this moment. To agree to the clause would compromise the safety and sovereignty of billions. To refuse could provoke the council, a body with centuries of authority and influence. After a brief consultation among themselves, the humans responded. They declined the clause firmly, explaining that Earth's resources and technology must remain under the control of humans alone. They emphasized that trust could not exist where coercion or manipulation was involved. The response shocked the council. Some members were visibly irritated, their lights flickering more rapidly, their gestures sharp and abrupt. Others were quiet, exchanging worried signals with each other. It became clear that the council had not expected humans to refuse so directly, and they were struggling to maintain their composure. Humans, on the other hand, remained calm and respectful. They did not raise their voices or display anger. Their firmness was quiet, deliberate, and unwavering, a stark contrast to the council's subtle displays of frustration. The room became tense. Discussions that had been structured and orderly turned chaotic as the council attempted to assert authority. Representatives used every tool at their disposal: persuasive speech, subtle manipulation, and even veiled threats to convince the humans to reconsider. Some of the arguments appealed to logic, presenting scenarios where collaboration could bring enormous benefits to Earth. Others were more coercive, implying consequences if humans continued to resist. Humans listened to everything, but remained resolute. They repeated their stance calmly. Cooperation was welcome, but submission or loss of autonomy was unacceptable. Outside the immediate discussion, the humans observed the dynamics of the other species present. Some were clearly impressed by the humans' composure and clarity. They whispered among themselves, sharing quiet recognition that Earth's representatives were not ordinary beings to be easily controlled. Others appeared skeptical or impatient, questioning whether humans' principles would hold when faced with real pressure. The humans noticed these reactions, but did not let them affect their focus. Every movement and word was measured, guided, by the understanding that maintaining integrity was more important than winning temporary favor. As the session continued, the council tried a new tactic. They attempted to isolate individual members of the human delegation, pulling them aside for private conversations with promises of special benefits if they would compromise. The humans anticipated this. They had trained extensively for scenarios where subtle manipulation or divide-and-conquer strategies might be used. No matter how persuasive the offers or intense the pressure, they stayed united, always returning to the central position that Earth's independence could not be compromised. The Council quickly realized that their usual tactics would not work on humans. The atmosphere in the chamber grew heavier. Whispers became murmurs, murmurs became tense exchanges, and some members of the Council openly questioned the humans' intentions. Were they naive, stubborn, or dangerously confident? Humans sensed that the Council was beginning to view them not as simple negotiators, but as a species with its own distinct power not of weapons or technology, but of principle, intelligence, and unity. This subtle shift in perception was crucial. Humans knew that gaining respect without aggression could sometimes be more powerful than any display of force. Despite the tension, humans maintained moments of engagement that demonstrated their willingness to cooperate. They asked questions, suggested ideas, and explored alternatives that could benefit both Earth and the Council without compromising autonomy. These moments of collaboration created small openings in the Council's rigidity. Some members began to see that humans were not merely defiant. They were capable of constructive problem-solving. Yet these positive moments were balanced by sharp reminders from the Council of their authority, creating a push-and-pull dynamic that kept everyone alert and engaged. The critical incident reached its peak when a particularly influential Council member openly questioned the humans' commitment to peace. In a dramatic gesture, they suggested that humans were naive to think that they could negotiate as equals with a body that had centuries of experience. The humans responded without anger or fear. They calmly explained that experience does not justify coercion, and that fairness, transparency, and mutual respect were not signs of naivety, but of intelligence. Their response was clear, firm, and principled, leaving the Council member momentarily speechless. The room fell silent, and even the other Council members seemed to pause, recognizing that humans were not easily intimidated. By the end of the day, humans had survived the first real test of their negotiation skills. They had faced coercion, manipulation, and subtle threats, yet they had maintained unity, clarity, and principle. The Council, meanwhile, was forced to acknowledge that they were dealing with a species unlike any they had encountered before. Humans were not aggressive, yet they were not weak. They could be reasoned with, yet they could not be controlled. Their combination of composure, intelligence, and ethical conviction made them both unpredictable and formidable. Outside the chamber, humans reflected on the day's events. They discussed the Council's reactions, analyzed the attempts at manipulation, and reinforced their commitment to unity and principle. They understood that the incident was more than a challenge. It was a test of humanity's ability to stand firm under pressure. They also recognized that this was only the beginning. If the Council was willing to attempt coercion on the first day of negotiation, the days ahead would likely bring more complex and subtle challenges. Yet, humans were prepared. They had trained for this, observed carefully, and relied on their collective intelligence and judgment to guide them. The incident had also highlighted the importance of trust within the human delegation. Each member depended on the others to provide insight, perspective, and support. Alone, any individual might have been pressured into a concession. Together, they formed a resilient front that could withstand even the most intense scrutiny and manipulation. This unity, combined with clear principles, was their strongest asset. The day ended with a quiet but powerful realization. Humans had begun to reshape the Jinn Council's perception of them. They were no longer seen as mere newcomers or naive participants. They were recognized, even if begrudgingly, as a species that valued principle over convenience, intelligence over compliance, and unity over division. This was not victory, but it was progress, a crucial step in a long and complex negotiation process. As humans prepared to rest, they reflected on what they had learned. The Council's coercion had revealed weaknesses, assumptions, and patterns that would inform every future interaction. Humans understood that they had to remain vigilant, maintain unity, and communicate clearly. They had also learned that standing firm with principle could create respect even among those who initially opposed them. The day's events had tested them, and they had passed not through aggression or force, but through reason, clarity, and courage. By the end of Part 3, the stage was set for further escalation. Humans had faced the first major challenge of negotiation and had emerged intact, their principles intact, and their unity strengthened. The Council had begun to recognize that underestimating humans was a mistake. The day began with a quiet sense of tension among the human delegation. Overnight, they had reflected deeply on the events of the previous day, the coercion, the manipulation, and the subtle attempts by the Council to assert control. Each member understood the stakes. They were not only representing themselves, they were standing for an entire planet, for billions of lives, for the principle that Earth's sovereignty could not be compromised. Today would be different. Today, a decision would have to be made. The Council convened as usual, their chambers glowing with shifting lights and humming energy. Members greeted the humans politely, but there was a faint edge in their tone. They had been surprised the day before by the humans' steadfast refusal to compromise, and now, perhaps, there was curiosity mixed with frustration. The humans knew that the Council expected them to be pliable, to bend under pressure, or to negotiate under terms that favored the galaxy's older civilizations. But humans had been trained to think carefully, to evaluate every situation, and to act decisively when principles were at stake. The first discussions of the day quickly revealed that the Council had no intention of softening its stance. They presented revised proposals, framing them as compromises, but the humans saw clearly that the essence of the agreements still threatened Earth's autonomy. Certain clauses would allow the Council to monitor Earth's development, influence decisions, and even indirectly control resources. Humans listened attentively, asking questions, probing for clarity, and testing the intentions behind each statement. It became obvious that despite the Council's careful wording, their goal was the same: to gain influence over Earth under the guise of cooperation. As the discussions continued, a quiet realization settled over the human delegation. They were at a crossroads. They could continue negotiating, hoping that persistence and patience might eventually lead to a fair agreement, or they could make a bold choice that would change the course of human-Council relations. That choice was not easy. Walking away from the Council was unprecedented. It risked angering a body with centuries of authority, potentially isolating Earth in the galaxy. Yet, staying meant accepting conditions that could compromise the very essence of their planet's independence. After careful deliberation, the delegation reached a unanimous decision. If the Council could not respect Earth's sovereignty, then Earth would respectfully withdraw. Making the decision was one thing. Implementing it was another. Humans knew that leaving the Council's chambers would be a dramatic act. It would send a clear message that they could not be manipulated, that they valued principle above convenience, and that they would not compromise their independence for the sake of temporary peace. They prepared carefully. Every word was chosen, every gesture measured, and every step planned to convey respect, clarity, and resolve. This was not an act of aggression. It was an act of self-respect. When the time came to announce their decision, the chamber was silent. Humans addressed the Council calmly, stating that while Earth desired peace and cooperation, it could not accept agreements that undermined its autonomy. They explained that the decision to withdraw was not made lightly, but was necessary to uphold the principles that guided humanity. The room remained quiet for a moment, and then reactions began to ripple through the Council. Some members were visibly shocked, others frustrated, and a few appeared contemplative. Humans spoke with clarity, emphasizing that withdrawal was a deliberate, principled choice, not an act of defiance or hostility. The council responded with a mixture of surprise and disbelief. Some representatives tried to persuade the humans to reconsider, offering revised terms, assurances, and promises. Humans listened respectfully, but did not waver. Every member of the delegation stood united, reinforcing the message that Earth's sovereignty was non-negotiable. The Council's attempts to regain control were met with calm, firm reasoning, leaving many members silent and unsettled. This steadfast approach conveyed a power that was not aggressive, but undeniable, a strength born from principle and unity. Outside the formal discussion, other species in the chamber observed closely. Some were clearly impressed by humanity's decision, recognizing that it took courage, intelligence, and discipline to act in such a principled manner. Others were skeptical, questioning whether humans truly understood the risks of withdrawal. The humans paid little attention to speculation. Their focus was on their purpose, to represent Earth and safeguard its independence. They understood that perception was important, but integrity was paramount. The act of withdrawal itself was executed with dignity. Humans stood, bowed slightly in respect, and announced their departure from the negotiations. They left the chamber without anger or spectacle, making their point through calm, deliberate action. As they exited, whispers and murmurs filled the halls. Council members exchanged glances, some worried, some frustrated, and others thoughtful. The departure had made an impact, far beyond what words could convey. Humans had demonstrated that they could assert themselves without aggression, and that principle and unity could be more powerful than intimidation or coercion. After leaving the council chambers, humans gathered in a quiet area to reflect on the day's events. The decision to withdraw was not easy, and they were aware of the consequences. Yet they also recognized the importance of standing firm. This was more than a negotiation. It was a statement about the kind of species humanity was. They valued fairness, respect, and independence. They would not compromise these values, even in the face of centuries-old authority. This reflection strengthened their resolve and reinforced their confidence in the path they had chosen. The withdrawal also sent waves through the council itself. Members began to realize that underestimating humans had been a serious mistake. They had assumed that a young species would be pliable, that it would bend under pressure, or accept terms that were convenient for the council. Humans had proven otherwise. Their departure was a powerful reminder that intelligence, principle, and unity could not be dismissed. Quiet discussions and private consultations revealed that some members were reconsidering their approach, recognizing that humanity demanded respect, not manipulation. The humans' decision had broader implications. News of the withdrawal reached other species and delegations, creating ripples across the interstellar community. Some were inspired by humanity's courage and principle. Others questioned whether a species so young could truly hold its ground against the authority of the council. Humans, however, remained focused. They knew that influence was not measured by fear or force, but by integrity, clarity, and the ability to act decisively when principles were at stake. As the day drew to a close, humans reflected on what they had learned about negotiation, diplomacy, and strength. They understood that standing firm did not require aggression, that unity was a powerful tool, and that principle could outweigh intimidation. They had faced coercion, manipulation, and subtle threats, and had responded with calm intelligence. Their decision to withdraw was a statement of self-respect and a demonstration that Earth's sovereignty could not be compromised. The withdrawal also prompted important discussions among the humans themselves. They analyzed the council's reactions, considered possible next steps, and prepared for the long-term consequences of their actions. They knew that withdrawal was not the end, but the beginning of a new phase in human-council relations. It was a bold move, one that would shape the future of interstellar diplomacy. They understood the risks, but also the potential rewards: respect, recognition, and the ability to negotiate on equal terms in the future. The act of withdrawal had also highlighted the importance of careful observation and preparation. Humans had anticipated the Council's tactics, prepared responses, and maintained unity throughout the process. These skills were crucial, not only for this negotiation, but for any future interactions with other species in the galaxy. Humans had proven that they could navigate complex, high-pressure situations with intelligence, discipline, and principle. By the end of the day, the human delegation had accomplished something remarkable. They had demonstrated that even in a galaxy dominated by centuries-old authority, a young species could assert itself through principle, clarity, and unity. The Council had been forced to recognize that humans were not ordinary participants in interstellar diplomacy. They were capable, intelligent, and principled, a species that valued autonomy, fairness, and respect above convenience or coercion. Humans returned to their quarters with a quiet sense of satisfaction. They knew that the decision to withdraw would not be universally understood or accepted, but they also knew that it was the right choice. They had acted in accordance with their principles, represented Earth faithfully, and demonstrated the strength of unity and reasoned action. The galaxy had taken notice, and the Council had begun to recognize that humanity was not a species to be underestimated or controlled. The withdrawal marked a turning point. It was a powerful statement that principle and unity could challenge authority without aggression. It was a demonstration that intelligence, courage, and integrity could hold their own against centuries of tradition and power. Humans had shown that they could stand firm, act decisively, and represent an entire planet with dignity and clarity. The lesson. After the humans withdrew from the council chambers, a wave of quiet tension swept through the Galactic Council. What had seemed like a simple negotiation had transformed into something far more complicated. The humans' refusal to compromise and their principled withdrawal had left a mark that the Council could not ignore. In private chambers and corridors, whispers and debates broke out among members. Many began to realize that the humans were not just a young, inexperienced species. They were a species with intelligence, courage, and a sense of ethics that demanded recognition. The first shock came from the most senior members of the Council. They were used to centuries of authority, to species yielding under pressure, to negotiations proceeding according to the rules they had created over centuries. The humans had disrupted that expectation. Their calm refusal to give in, their unity, and their clarity had created an unprecedented situation. Some of the Council's oldest members struggled to accept it. They had underestimated Earth, assuming that it would negotiate like every other species before it. They had been wrong. The Council began to review the day's events in detail. Holographic records of the discussions were analyzed, and private consultations took place to understand how humans had remained so firm without aggression. What they saw was a combination of preparation, observation, and discipline. Humans had studied the Council carefully, understood the subtle signals, and responded to coercion and manipulation with reason and integrity. The realization hit hard. This was not a species that could be bullied or tricked. Whispers of "we underestimated them" spread quickly. Some members admitted it openly, acknowledging that the Council had misjudged the human strength, intelligence, and sense of unity. Others were reluctant to admit it, clinging to the belief that humans were simply stubborn or naive. But as the day went on, even the skeptics began to notice patterns that could not be ignored. The humans' withdrawal had been more than a simple refusal. It had been a strategic, deliberate action demonstrating their principles. Across the chambers, private meetings began to take place. Council members who had initially supported coercive measures began to reconsider their approach. They realized that trying to force compliance had not only failed, but it had also created a situation that could damage long-term relations. The human's ability to maintain composure and unity under pressure was a revelation. It became clear that the Council could not treat Earth like any other young species. Humans demanded respect, and respect had to be earned, not assumed. Some members began to question their own assumptions. How could a species so young, with only a fraction of the Council's experience, command such presence and influence? The answer lay in the humans' combination of patience, observation, and principle. They were not aggressive, yet they were firm. They were curious, yet cautious. They were willing to cooperate, yet they demanded fairness. The Council had been prepared to negotiate with a species that would either bend or resist openly. Humans had done neither, creating a challenge the Council had not anticipated. The implications of this realization spread beyond the Council chambers. Delegates from other species began to discuss humanity in hushed tones. Some were impressed by the strength and integrity displayed. They had never seen a species stand firm in the face of centuries-old authority without resorting to aggression. Others were skeptical, wondering if humans' approach could hold under future pressure or conflict. Humans, of course, were not present to hear these discussions, but the effect was significant. Across the galaxy, the perception of Earth began to shift. Humans were no longer seen as newcomers. They were a species with principle, intelligence, and determination. Within the Council, a more serious conversation began. Members realized that they had a choice: continue to push and risk alienating Earth permanently, or acknowledge their misjudgment and seek a new path forward. This was not easy. The Council's culture was built on tradition, authority, and centuries of experience. Admitting a mistake was rare and often uncomfortable. Yet the evidence was undeniable. Humans had made it clear that they would not compromise their principles, and the Council had no easy way to change that. Some members began to advocate for a new approach. They suggested that the Council engage in more transparent dialogue, treat humans as equals, and demonstrate genuine respect for Earth's autonomy. Others resisted, arguing that such concessions would weaken the Council's authority. The debate was heated, but it was impossible to ignore the fact that humans had changed the dynamic. They had demonstrated that intelligence, courage, and principle could alter long-standing assumptions about power and negotiation. Meanwhile, humans were observing the situation from a distance. They were aware of the Council's attempts to regroup and reassess, and they understood the importance of maintaining their position. Withdrawal had been a calculated move, designed to show that Earth would not be coerced. But humans also knew that they needed to stay vigilant. They monitored communications and gathered information about the Council's reactions, preparing for the next phase of interaction. The Council's recognition of its mistake was gradual but undeniable. Private meetings revealed a growing awareness that humans were not just principled. They were capable of influencing the course of interstellar diplomacy through reason and unity alone. This realization was accompanied by a sense of respect, even if some members were reluctant to admit it publicly. Humans had demonstrated that power was not only in authority or force, but in intelligence, ethics, and the ability to act decisively while maintaining dignity. As the day progressed, the Council began to consider the long-term implications. Humans had withdrawn from the talks, but the message they sent was clear. Cooperation was welcome, but only on equal terms. Any attempt to coerce or manipulate would be met with firm refusal. The Council realized that future interactions would require genuine dialogue and respect, rather than reliance on intimidation or tradition. This understanding began to shape new strategies, with some members advocating for more thoughtful engagement with Earth. The recognition of the mistake also prompted internal reflection within the Council. Members examined how they had underestimated humanity, how they had assumed compliance without understanding principles, and how their own authority had blinded them to the potential of a species guided by intelligence and ethics. This self-reflection was uncomfortable, but necessary. Humans had forced the Council to confront assumptions that had gone unchallenged for centuries. At the same time, other species within the galaxy began to observe these events closely. Humans' withdrawal and the Council's reaction became a case study in negotiation, principle, and strategy. Some species admired humanity's courage and clarity, while others remained cautious. Across the galaxy, humans were gaining recognition not through aggression or dominance, but through integrity and reason. Their actions demonstrated that a species could assert itself on the galactic stage without weapons, without force, and without compromise of principles. By the end of the day, the Council had reached an uneasy consensus. They recognized that humans had demonstrated qualities that could not be ignored: intelligence, unity, patience, and principled reasoning. The mistake of underestimating Earth was clear, and future interactions would need to reflect this understanding. Some members were reluctant, fearing that admitting error would weaken authority. Yet the evidence was too strong to ignore. Humans had changed the dynamic, and the Council had no choice but to acknowledge it. Meanwhile, humans continued to prepare for the next phase. They reflected on the lessons learned, the importance of unity, the power of principle, and the value of careful observation. They understood that withdrawal had been a bold move, but it had also been necessary to demonstrate strength and integrity. They remained ready for whatever challenges the future might bring, confident that their approach grounded in reason, ethics, and patience would guide them successfully through complex negotiations. The Council's recognition of its mistake also had a subtle but profound effect on interstellar diplomacy. Humans had set a new standard, showing that a young species could negotiate with intelligence and principle, even against centuries-old authority. Other species took note, realizing that Earth could not be treated like a subordinate member of the galactic community. Humans' actions were quietly reshaping expectations, creating a new understanding of what it meant to engage with the planet on equal terms. By the end of Part 5, the stage was set for a new chapter in the story. The Council had recognized its mistake. Humans had demonstrated their strength and integrity, and the galaxy was beginning to see Earth in a new light. The dynamics of interstellar relations had shifted, not through force or aggression, but through principle, intelligence, and unwavering unity. Humans had proven that even a young species could command respect, influence perceptions, and shape the future through careful, thoughtful, and principled action. The lesson was clear. Respect could not be assumed. Authority could not dominate intelligence, and principle could not be ignored. Humans had withdrawn, yet their impact had been profound. The Council now faced the challenge of adjusting to a species that demanded fairness, clarity, and autonomy, a species that had demonstrated, through action rather than words, After the humans' bold withdrawal from the Galactic Council, the atmosphere throughout the galaxy began to shift. The decision had been noticed far beyond the Council's chambers, reaching species on distant planets, trade hubs, and diplomatic centers. Across countless worlds, whispers circulated about Earth and its representatives, a young, relatively inexperienced species that had stood firm against centuries-old authority. Humans had demonstrated something remarkable: strength without aggression, principle without stubbornness, and courage without recklessness. The impact of their actions would resonate for a long time. Within the Council itself, the days following the withdrawal were marked by reflection and debate. Senior members convened in private, reviewing holographic recordings of the discussions, analyzing every exchange, and questioning the assumptions that had guided them for centuries. How had they underestimated humans? How had a species so new, so seemingly fragile in the vast universe, demonstrated such clarity, intelligence, and composure? The realization was difficult to accept, but undeniable. Humans had changed the expectations of what a species could accomplish through principle and unity alone. Some members argued that the humans, Withdrawal was a tactical mistake, believing that Earth might isolate itself from valuable interstellar cooperation. Others, however, recognized the courage and wisdom behind the decision. The humans had made it clear that cooperation was welcome, but only on equal terms, and only when respect for autonomy and sovereignty was guaranteed. The Council began to understand that this was not defiance or recklessness. It was a deliberate, principled choice that reflected the unique character of humanity. In private discussions, the Council debated how to respond. Any attempt to punish or pressure Earth could backfire, potentially creating long-term distrust or conflict. Instead, a growing faction within the Council advocated for recognition, diplomacy, and a more respectful approach. They realized that humans had set a precedent. A species could be principled, steadfast, and influential without resorting to aggression. This revelation was uncomfortable for many, but it was also transformative. The Council had learned a lesson that centuries of experience had never taught them. Respect could not be assumed. It had to be earned, even with those they considered less experienced. Meanwhile, humans were observing the Council's internal reactions from a distance. They were aware of the debates, the reconsideration of strategy, and the gradual recognition of their influence. Yet they remained cautious. Withdrawal had been necessary to demonstrate principle, but it was only the first step. The galaxy was vast and complex, and humans understood that maintaining integrity required vigilance, preparation, and clear communication. They knew that perception was important, and they observed the Council carefully, analyzing subtle signals and behavior changes that indicated shifts in attitude and strategy. In the weeks following the withdrawal, humans began to engage selectively with the Council, responding to communications and inquiries with measured clarity. They maintained a tone of respect while reinforcing the boundaries that had prompted their withdrawal. Every interaction was an opportunity to demonstrate that humans could negotiate intelligently, collaborate effectively, and uphold principle without aggression. Their consistent, reasoned approach slowly reshaped the perception of Earth in the eyes of the Council and the wider galaxy. The recognition of humans' unique approach began to influence other species as well. Some began to see Earth as an example of what diplomacy could look like when guided by intelligence, principle, and unity. Others took note of the humans' ability to stand firm without conflict, understanding that a species did not need overwhelming power to command respect. Humans were quietly redefining what it meant to participate in galactic diplomacy. They were showing that influence came not only from strength or experience, but from integrity, clarity, and thoughtful action. Within the Council, this shift in perception had concrete consequences. Policies, proposals, and agreements were reconsidered with Earth in mind. Council members recognized that humans would not be easily swayed by coercion, manipulation, or intimidation. They began to approach future interactions with more care, more transparency, and more respect. The withdrawal had forced a change not only in strategy, but in attitude, a recognition that Earth was a planet to be treated as an equal, not a subordinate. Humans themselves continued to reflect on the lessons of this period. They understood that negotiation and diplomacy required patience, observation, and careful judgment. They recognized that their actions had consequences far beyond the immediate situation, and that every choice could shape the galaxy's perception of Earth for generations. Withdrawal had been a bold step, but it had been guided by principle, unity, and strategic thinking. Humans had demonstrated that they could assert themselves on a galactic stage while remaining grounded, ethical, and composed. As time went on, the Council began to take concrete steps to rebuild trust and establish a new framework for interaction. They initiated communications emphasizing respect for Earth's autonomy and expressed a willingness to engage in dialogue under fair terms. These gestures were not just formalities. They reflected a genuine recognition of the human's influence, and an understanding that past assumptions had been flawed. The Council had learned that underestimating a principled species could lead to miscalculations, and that diplomacy required both respect and careful attention to unique circumstances. Humans responded thoughtfully, engaging in dialogue without compromising their principles. They were selective in what they shared, careful in how they interacted, and clear in their communication. Every decision reinforced the idea that Earth would not yield to coercion, but that collaboration was possible when grounded in mutual respect. This approach slowly built a foundation of trust, demonstrating that humans were capable of shaping relationships through intelligence, principle, and reasoned action rather than force. The lessons of this period extended beyond the Council. Across the galaxy, humans' actions were discussed, analyzed, and recognized as significant. Other species began to consider Earth differently, understanding that a young planet could influence the galactic community without aggressive displays of power. Humans had set a new standard for negotiation, showing that integrity, unity, and intelligence could earn respect in ways that brute force never could. By the end of this chapter, it was clear that humans had fundamentally altered the dynamics of interstellar relations. The Council had acknowledged its misjudgment. Other species were reconsidering assumptions, and Earth had established itself as a principled, capable participant on the galactic stage. The decision to withdraw had not been a retreat. It had been a strategic assertion of strength, integrity, and foresight. Humans had demonstrated that even a young species could command respect, shape perceptions, and influence the actions of civilizations far older and more experienced. As humans reflected on the journey, they recognized that the withdrawal and its aftermath were not just about negotiation, they were about identity. They had shown the galaxy that Earth valued principle, integrity, and unity above expediency or convenience. They had demonstrated that cooperation was welcome when based on fairness, but that sovereignty and autonomy were non-negotiable. The impact of their actions extended beyond any immediate agreement. It had reshaped the way the galaxy perceived humanity. The story of Earth's withdrawal would become a point of reference for generations to come. It was a testament to the power of reason, principle, and strategic thinking. Humans had faced coercion, manipulation, and centuries-old authority, yet they had maintained composure and integrity. They had shown that diplomacy could be powerful without aggression, that intelligence could command respect without force, and that principle could shape perception across vast distances. By the conclusion of this chapter, the Galactic Council had recognized its mistake. Humans had proven that they were not a species to be underestimated or coerced. The Council began to approach future negotiations differently, with greater respect, transparency, and understanding. Earth had demonstrated that a young planet, guided by principle and intelligence, could assert itself on the galactic stage and influence centuries-old institutions without resorting to conflict. Humans returned from this period stronger, wiser, and more confident in their place in the galaxy. They had faced the challenge, acted decisively, and shaped the perceptions of civilizations far older and more experienced. Their actions were a demonstration of what could be accomplished when unity, principle, and intelligence guide decision-making. The withdrawal from the Council was not a loss. It was a victory of integrity and foresight, a declaration that Earth's voice mattered, that its principles could not be compromised, and that its future would be guided by reason, courage, and dignity.